What if the biggest threat to national security wasn't out there, on a foreign battlefield, but inside the walls of the CIA itself? These aren't spy thrillers. These are real stories. Government secrets sold to enemy states. Innocent lives betrayed. And careers shattered forever. Today we pull back the curtain on 8 CIA officers who were trusted with America's most guarded intelligence, until they weren't. This is the story the CIA never wanted the public to hear, but before we begin, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell icon for you not to miss our next jaw-dropping story. Case 1, Joshua Adam Schulte, the Cyber Mole. It started inside a sealed, high-security building tucked away in the Northern Virginia suburbs, far from public view behind layers of security and surveillance. Within that building was a wing of the CIA known only to those who needed to know. It was home to the Operations Support Branch, or OSB, a covert unit not made up of field agents, but of highly trained software engineers and hackers who created the agency's most powerful cyber tools. These were the individuals responsible for building digital weapons, programs capable of infiltrating foreign governments' networks, extracting sensitive information, and covering their tracks with such precision that no one would ever know they were there. Among them was Joshua Adam Schulte, a young, sharp software developer from Texas, who joined the CIA with both technical brilliance and a difficult personality. Known to some of his colleagues as a gifted coder, Schulte also developed a reputation for being combative, arrogant, and frequently at odds with his supervisors. Despite this, he was trusted with some of the agency's most secret and sensitive cyber operations. He had access to the entire Vault 7 toolkit, a vast collection of custom-made hacking software designed to break into systems and spy on America's adversaries. But the tension inside the OSB team had been growing. Schulte clashed with his co-workers and supervisors, accusing them of harassment and professional sabotage. His frustrations mounted, and when he was reassigned from the CIA's core cyber operations to a less critical role, something shifted. Beneath the professional disputes and internal complaints, a plan was taking shape. Quiet, calculated, and entirely unexpected. In 2016, while still employed by the CIA, Schulte began secretly collecting and copying the classified source code that formed the backbone of the CIA's digital espionage capabilities. Over weeks and months, he methodically packaged thousands of files, which included malware, zero-day exploits, internal documentation, and targeting strategies. By the time he left the agency, the damage had already been done. On March 7, 2017, WikiLeaks released a massive leak of CIA documents, codenamed Vault 7. The release consisted of nearly 9,000 files and revealed the CIA's entire playbook for cyber operations. The documents described tools that could turn smart TVs into listening devices, hack into smartphones and computers, and even mimic the signatures of foreign hackers to mislead investigators. Intelligence experts were stunned. The leak was described as more devastating than the Snowden revelations. Unlike Edward Snowden, who exposed surveillance policies, this leak revealed the actual tools and techniques the CIA relied on to conduct cyber warfare. The agency was thrown into crisis mode. Internal investigators scrambled to determine the source of the breach. Log files were examined. Access privileges were audited. Suspicion eventually fell on Schulte, whose behavior and technical access made him a prime suspect. But the evidence was not yet enough to arrest him. That changed in March 2017, when the FBI raided Schulte's apartment in New York City. As agents searched through his devices and hard drives, they stumbled upon something unexpected: hundreds of images and videos of child sexual abuse stored in encrypted folders with misleading names. Though Schulte denied possessing the material and insisted he was being framed, the evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested in August 2017, initially on child pornography charges. But the espionage investigation did not stop there. Over the next several months, prosecutors built a detailed case, accusing Schulte of being the source behind the Vault 7 leak. They alleged that he had smuggled the classified material out of CIA systems, encrypted it on his personal server, and uploaded it to WikiLeaks as an act of revenge against his former employer. In 2018, he was formally indicted for illegal transmission of national defense information and obstruction of justice, among other charges. His first trial in 2020 ended in a mistrial on the most serious espionage charges, with the jury deadlocked. But a second trial in 2022 resulted in his conviction on all counts related to the unauthorized disclosure of classified material. In 2024, a federal judge sentenced him to 40 years in prison. Separately, he was also convicted for the possession of child exploitation material, adding to his sentence and solidifying his place as one of the most damaging insiders in CIA history. Case 2. Alexander Ching Ma, the double agent. Honolulu, Hawaii. Palm trees sway against the Pacific breeze, tourists roam the beachside streets, and the scent of salt water hangs thick in the air. To the casual observer, this place is paradise. But hidden among its tropical calm was a man carrying secrets, not just his own, but those of an entire intelligence agency. Alexander Ching Ma was born in Hong Kong and later became a naturalized U.S. citizen. Fluent in Mandarin and deeply familiar with Chinese culture, he was seen as an ideal recruit. In the 1980s, the CIA brought him into its ranks. 4 years he worked as a case officer, a trusted handler of classified information, operating in one of the most sensitive roles in the agency, gathering intelligence abroad and managing assets under deep cover. Then in 1989 Ma left the CIA and moved to China. What followed for the next decade remains murky. But by 2001 what he did next would change everything. Inside a hotel room in Hong Kong, Alexander Ma sat with Chinese intelligence officers. The camera rolled, not his but theirs. They were recording every word, every gesture, and every page of the documents he handed over. In those moments, Ma betrayed the country that once trusted him. He spoke at length about CIA operations. Names, locations, methods, all spilled onto the table. Some of the information pertained to covert personnel operating in sensitive regions. The footage left little room for doubt. This was no misunderstanding, no slip of judgment. It was a calculated betrayal. Then he returned to the United States, not to retire quietly but to continue his work. In 2004 Ma applied for a job with the FBI. The irony was staggering. He wasn't hired, but he did find work as a contract linguist with the FBI's field office in Honolulu. There he handled sensitive documents, many in Chinese, often tied to counterintelligence cases. He had returned to American intelligence, this time under the radar. But the past doesn't stay buried for long. In 2019, after years of patient investigation, the FBI staged a sting operation. They sent in an undercover agent posing as a Chinese intelligence officer. The meeting was arranged. In a quiet room in Honolulu, the two men sat across from each other. And once again Alexander Ma offered his services to China. He praised the Chinese government, lamented U.S. policy, and handed over classified documents he had access to through his translation work. This time the FBI was listening. He was arrested in August 2020. At 67 years old, Ma faced a reckoning that had been building for decades. In court, the evidence was undeniable. The 2001 hotel footage, recordings from the FBI sting, and his own words offering continued cooperation with a foreign power. In 2024 he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage. The sentence, 10 years in federal prison. Case 3, Jeffrey Raymond, the Predator. From the outside, Jeffrey Raymond had all the hallmarks of a high achiever. A polished professional with decades of service under his belt, he had been entrusted with some of the U.S. government's most sensitive international postings. His resume was impeccable. His demeanor, confident, composed, well-spoken. A man who moved easily through elite diplomatic circles, shaking hands at receptions, writing cables from embassies, briefing senior officials on matters of global importance. To his colleagues he was the model officer, reliable, discreet, and quietly effective. He worked in places that demanded absolute trust. Peru, Mexico, multiple stations across the globe. His final post was at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, a position that came with both prestige and significant responsibility. But behind the embassy gates, behind the pressed suits and State Department lanyards, was a hidden life, and a horrifying truth. For over a decade, Jeffrey Raymond was living a double existence. By day, a trusted representative of the United States government. By night, a predator. He didn't threaten or coerce in the traditional sense. He didn't break in through windows or skulk in shadows. What he did was more insidious, more controlled. He invited women back to his home, women he met online at social events or through dating apps. They would drink, talk, laugh. They thought they were safe. They weren't. He drugged them, quietly, efficiently, and once they were unconscious he began filming. Over the course of more than 10 years, Raymond recorded himself sexually assaulting women who were limp, lifeless, unable to consent, unable even to move. He filmed more than 500 videos, capturing the acts from multiple angles. He cataloged images, created folders, labeled and stored files. He left behind a digital archive of horror. Many of the women never knew what had happened. They would wake up groggy, disoriented, unsure of the night before, and he would reassure them, tell them they drank too much, nothing happened. Then he would disappear. For years it worked. There were no accusations. No investigations. His clearances remained intact. His assignments continued. Until May 2020. Inside a hotel room in Mexico City, one of his victims regained consciousness, mid-assault. Disoriented but aware enough to know she was in danger, she fled, half-dressed, terrified and bleeding. She reported the incident to Mexican authorities. That moment, her escape, was the first crack in a carefully constructed facade. The investigation began quietly. U.S. officials coordinated with Mexican authorities. Raymond abruptly resigned from his post and returned to the United States. But the evidence had already begun to surface. Search warrants were executed. Forensic teams analyzed his devices, hard drives, and cloud storage. What they found was staggering. A massive collection of explicit material, over 500 videos and hundreds of photos. Each file a window into a secret he had tried desperately to keep buried. More than 24 victims were eventually identified. Women from multiple countries, different backgrounds, many of whom had no idea they had even been assaulted. Some recognized themselves in the videos only after law enforcement showed them the footage. Others broke down in disbelief. There was no question about the scale. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a long-running system of abuse. A pattern meticulously carried out over years across borders. In 2021, Raymond was arrested in California. He initially denied the allegations, claiming the encounters were consensual. But the videos told another story. One by one the victims spoke. The court listened. In February 2024, Jeffrey Raymond pleaded guilty to multiple counts of sexual abuse and transportation of obscene material. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. The court also ordered him to pay restitution to at least 27 identified victims, though the true number may never be known. Case 4. Jeffrey Sterling, the whistleblower. He wasn't just any officer in the CIA. He was one of the very few black men to rise through its clandestine ranks. He served for nearly a decade, working in some of the most classified and politically delicate operations, including the CIA's covert efforts to hinder Iran's nuclear ambitions. He was assigned to what became known as Operation Merlin, a secret mission aimed at slipping flawed nuclear weapon blueprints to the Iranians, hoping they would waste time and resources chasing a dead end. But Sterling's career was not a straight line of advancement and trust. He claimed he was treated differently. Passed over. Ignored. Marginalized. He said the color of his skin was the reason. After filing a discrimination complaint internally, things changed. Sterling said he became isolated. His overseas assignments dried up. Eventually he was pushed out of the agency altogether. He believed it was retaliation, quiet, calculated, and complete. What happened next would catapult him into one of the most controversial leak investigations in modern U.S. history. In 2006, journalist James Nicholson published a book called State of War. Within its pages was a chapter describing a CIA operation that mirrored details of Operation Merlin, including specifics about the flawed blueprints, the delivery method, and the unintended consequences. The leak embarrassed the agency. It suggested the operation may have backfired, that instead of delaying Iran's progress, the flawed designs may have helped refine it. The CIA and the Justice Department launched a full-scale investigation. They wanted the source. After combing through communications, phone records, and old grievances, all roads, they said, led to Jeffrey Sterling. He was arrested in 2011. By then he was living a quiet life as a legal professional in Missouri. But the government charged him with multiple counts under the Espionage Act, alleging that he had willfully provided classified information to Nicholson. Sterling denied it. He maintained his innocence from day one. There was no hard proof, no email, no audio recording, no confession. The case was built on circumstantial evidence, phone records, timing, and motive. The prosecution said it was clear. Sterling, a disgruntled ex-agent, leaked the operation out of resentment. The defense countered. This wasn't espionage, it was retaliation for speaking out, and he wasn't the only one who could have leaked it. The trial was swift. The verdict: guilty on 9 counts, including unauthorized disclosure of national defense information. In 2015, Jeffrey Sterling was sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison. He served his time in Colorado, far from Washington, far from the world of intelligence operations and classified secrets. Case 5. Aldrich Hazen Ames, the Cold War traitor. In the hidden chessboard of the Cold War, few games were more dangerous than espionage. Every move, every whisper, every name shared had the potential to end a life, shift the balance of power, or collapse entire networks. Inside the CIA, one man held the black pieces, and he played for the other side. His name was Aldrich Hazen Ames. He joined the CIA in 1962, a fresh-faced recruit, the son of a former intelligence officer. Ames quickly climbed through the ranks, specializing in Soviet counterintelligence, gaining access to some of the agency's most guarded secrets. He was fluent in Russian, methodical and, at least on paper, trustworthy. But beneath that carefully controlled demeanor, a rot was setting in. By the mid-1980s, Ames was living far beyond his means. A modest government salary couldn't explain the $500,000 house in Arlington, the luxury Jaguar in the driveway, or the $6,000 a month credit card bills. And yet, his co-workers seemed to accept it. Maybe a wealthy spouse, an inheritance, some lucky investments? No one asked. No one looked closer. What they didn't know was that Aldrich Ames had crossed a line, one that would make him responsible for one of the deadliest intelligence breaches in American history. In 1985, Ames walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., and offered them what every intelligence service dreams of: the names of U.S. double agents working inside the Soviet Union. In exchange, he wanted money, and the KGB delivered. He was paid more than $2 million over the years, cash laundered through foreign bank accounts, shopping bags filled with bills, lavish gifts. And in return he gave the Soviets names. Real names. Operatives. Informants. Friends. At least 10 CIA assets were executed because of him. Others simply disappeared. Networks collapsed. The agency was stunned. Their strongest holds in Moscow were suddenly going dark, one by one. Inside Langley, suspicion ran high. A mole was in their midst. But it took years before they zeroed in on Ames. He had covered his tracks well, encrypting communications, avoiding detection, even volunteering for polygraph tests that he passed. But the spending, the wild, unexplained wealth, eventually caught up to him. The FBI and CIA launched a joint mole hunt. By 1993, Ames was under surveillance. His trash was searched. His phone calls recorded. Agents followed him to meetings, observed his routines. And then, confirmation. Documents, handwritten notes, links to Soviet handlers. On February 21, 1994, Aldrich Ames and his wife Rosario were arrested outside their home in Arlington, Virginia. The trial was swift. He pleaded guilty to espionage and tax evasion, in a deal that spared his wife a potential life sentence. But there was no mercy for Ames. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He now resides in a high-security federal prison, a traitor to the country he once swore to protect. Case 6. Harold James Nicholson, the spy who came back twice. Harold James Nicholson was not just any CIA officer. By the early 1990s, he had become one of the agency's most trusted insiders, a seasoned intelligence veteran fluent in Russian with overseas assignments in Manila, Bucharest, and Bangkok, and eventually, a prestigious post as an instructor at the CIA's training facility known as the Farm, where he taught new recruits the very techniques used to detect and prevent espionage. Few suspected that he, of all people, would betray everything he was meant to protect. But beginning in 1994, Nicholson crossed a line that would make him the highest-ranking CIA officer ever convicted of espionage. Over the course of 2 years, he willingly passed highly classified information to Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, known as the SVR, the successor to the KGB. In exchange for cash, Nicholson revealed the names of CIA trainees, sensitive operational details, internal assessments, and even the travel schedules of senior agency personnel. He exploited his access to the next generation of American spies and systematically fed that intelligence to Russian handlers during trips to Asia. What motivated this betrayal was not ideology but greed. Nicholson, living beyond his means and burdened by debt, accepted over $300,000 from the Russian government. With the money he paid off loans, purchased luxury items, and supported a lifestyle that far exceeded his federal salary. During this time he continued to serve in sensitive positions within the agency, all while hiding his double life from colleagues, friends, and even his own family. But by late 1995, internal CIA security officers grew suspicious. Nicholson had failed multiple polygraph tests, had access to materials outside his clearance, and had made several suspicious trips abroad under the guise of official business. A joint investigation by the CIA and the FBI was launched quietly. Agents began tracking his movements, scrutinizing his finances, and analyzing his laptop, where they uncovered drafts of classified reports and communications not connected to any legitimate assignment. The evidence mounted swiftly, and on November 16, 1996, Harold James Nicholson was arrested at Dulles International Airport as he prepared to board a flight for Europe, allegedly to meet a Russian contact. In 1997 he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and was sentenced to 23 years and 7 months in federal prison. Most assumed the case was closed. But Nicholson's story didn't end there. While incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon, Nicholson reinitiated contact with his former Russian handlers, this time using an unlikely courier, his son Nathaniel. During prison visits and secret communications, Nicholson coached Nathaniel on how to deliver messages, collect payments, and keep up the family's link to the SVR. Between 2006 and 2008, Nathaniel Nicholson traveled across the United States and abroad, meeting with Russian operatives in San Francisco, New York, Mexico City, and even Lima, Peru. In these meetings, he hand-delivered messages from his father and received thousands of dollars in cash, payments disguised as consulting fees but, in reality, compensation for Nicholson's continued loyalty to Russian intelligence. What the Nicholsons didn't realize was that the FBI had been monitoring their activities. Federal agents had bugged prison visits, tapped phone lines, and tailed Nathaniel's international travel. Eventually, Nathaniel was confronted and he cooperated. He admitted everything. In 2011, Harold James Nicholson pleaded guilty once again, this time to conspiring to act as an agent of a foreign government while in prison and to committing money laundering. He was sentenced to an additional 8 years in prison, extending his incarceration well beyond his original term. Nathaniel, who had been manipulated by his father and who assisted authorities, was sentenced to probation rather than prison. Case 7. William Kampiles, the satellite seller. In the waning years of the 1970s, the Cold War's shadow stretched long across the world, and intelligence was power. In that climate, even the most junior position inside the CIA came with a burden of trust. A burden that 23-year-old William Kampiles would shatter in one reckless act of betrayal. Kampiles was not a career spy or a high-ranking officer. He worked the night shift as a communications clerk at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. The job was menial, routine, and far from the glamorous world of espionage he had imagined when he joined the agency. Disillusioned, overlooked, and seeking a more thrilling path, he made a fateful decision. In early 1978, Kampiles removed a top-secret manual for the KH-11, America's most advanced reconnaissance satellite at the time. Known as a keyhole satellite, the KH-11 could capture high-resolution images of military and strategic targets from space. The manual detailed the satellite's design, imaging capabilities, orbital paths, and encryption systems. Information that, in the wrong hands, could compromise an entire generation of U.S. intelligence operations. Instead of reporting the theft or returning the document, Kampiles devised a dangerous plan. He bought a plane ticket to Athens, Greece, and walked into the Soviet embassy with the manual under his arm. In a single meeting, he handed one of America's most closely guarded secrets to Soviet intelligence officers, in exchange for just $3,000 in cash. The Soviets accepted the document but were suspicious of his approach. They asked him to maintain contact, and Kampiles returned to the U.S., believing he was about to begin a new career as a double agent. But back in Washington, his inexperience caught up with him. Desperate to impress, Kampiles began bragging to colleagues and acquaintances that he had contacts with the Soviets. His behavior raised eyebrows, and within weeks, word reached the FBI. The Bureau opened a discreet investigation and quickly set up a sting operation. Kampiles, convinced of his own importance, fell right into their trap. He confessed to stealing and selling the KH-11 manual during interviews with federal agents, believing they might be interested in recruiting him. Instead, he was arrested, charged under the Espionage Act, and placed on trial. In November 1978, William Kampiles was convicted of espionage. The court did not buy into his claim that he merely wanted to become a double agent. The severity of the betrayal, giving Soviet operatives access to the technological crown jewel of American satellite surveillance, led to a sentence of 40 years in federal prison. Case 8. Chris Kiriakou, the torture tattler. Chris Kiriakou was no ordinary CIA officer. Fluent in Arabic and seasoned in counterterrorism operations, he served as a senior intelligence officer in the early 2000s, embedded deeply in the CIA's war against al-Qaeda. In 2002, Kiriakou played a central role in the high-profile capture of Abu Zubaydah, a suspected senior al-Qaeda figure believed to have close ties to Osama bin Laden. His successful coordination of that operation earned him respect and recognition within the agency and among U.S. counterterrorism circles. But Kiriakou's career path would soon take a dramatic and controversial turn. In 2007, 5 years after leaving the CIA, Kiriakou appeared in a nationally televised ABC News interview where, for the first time, a former U.S. intelligence official openly admitted that the CIA had used waterboarding during interrogations. Speaking publicly, he called the practice torture, a term the U.S. government had long avoided. Though he did not name names during that interview, his statements confirmed suspicions that the CIA had engaged in coercive methods many around the world considered to be war crimes. While Kiriakou's admission made headlines, it wasn't his public criticism of waterboarding that led to criminal charges. The real trouble began in 2008, when Kiriakou, in the course of speaking with journalists, confirmed the identity of a covert CIA operative who had been involved in the post-9/11 interrogation program. That operative's name, which was still classified, ultimately found its way to defense attorneys representing detainees at Guantanamo Bay. Although Kiriakou did not publicly release the name himself, the government charged him with violating the Intelligence Identities Protection Act and several provisions of the Espionage Act, serious offenses that carried the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. After intense legal pressure and the risk of decades behind bars, Kiriakou accepted a plea deal. In 2013, he pleaded guilty to a single count of knowingly disclosing the identity of a covert agent and was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. If you found this story gripping, informative, or eye-opening, then don't forget to like this video, share it with others who need to hear the truth behind the headlines, and subscribe to this channel for more hard-hitting true crime and intelligence exposés. And remember, some secrets are worth telling, but every secret has a price.